And joining us now, the Minister of Revenue for the province of Ontario. There's John Wilkinson, also the MPP for Perth Wellington. And we're glad to have you in that seat here at TVO tonight.
Great. Thanks for having me.
When I first met you, you had a really nice job in Cabinet. You were the Minister for Innovation. You went to a lot of science fairs. You met a lot of brainy people. And obviously you said something along the way to really upset Premier McGuinty, because he's now handed you the toughest job in Cabinet. What did you say to pee him off, as it were?
Well, Steve, my background before I got into politics is as a certified financial planner. So I'm the first certified financial planner elected to the legislature. So the Premier's looking, I think, amongst his caucus, trying to find somebody who could have the job of implementing tax reform and communicating it. And that is something that I'm very comfortable with. And, you know, not everybody is comfortable when it comes to talking about taxes, I understand that. But it's something I was doing for over 20 years before I got elected. So I think that's why he picked me. But I leave that up to him.
You didn't get him mad about something, and that's okay. Never mind. We're moving on. I get that you're presenting this as a comprehensive tax reform package, one piece of which is the harmonization of the provincial sales tax and the goods and services tax. I get that, but I do want to know why anyone in this province, why you think they would want to start paying an additional 8% tax on things like haircuts and music lessons that they previously had not paid tax on.
Well, I wouldn't start by saying that we're doing this to be popular. We're doing this because we have a problem and we have to fix that problem. And the problem is simply this: two things don't go together. High quality public services, like our healthcare and our public education, and high unemployment. Those two things don't go together. We need to get the rate of unemployment down. We need to get people back to work. We can't afford the public services that define us as Ontarians and have high unemployment.
How does this help that?
Well, because it's all designed, our tax reform is all designed to get Ontario to be more competitive so that in the 21st century we can compete for jobs. And what we're doing is we're hauling our tax system, which was created in the 20th century, back in 1961, and modernizing it so that we can compete in the 21st century with 130 other countries around the world who've already taken the difficult step, but the necessary step, to modernize their tax system.
Okay, necessary but difficult sounds to me like tax increase. This is a tax increase at the end of the day, right?
It is an increase in consumption tax, and all of that money decreases income taxes for people and for businesses. So it doesn't raise any additional revenue for the province, but what it does is it restructures, it reforms our tax system. We get money from sales tax and we get money from income tax. And what we're doing is changing that balance, because that allows us to be more competitive.
Why is it fairer to put more taxes on people who go out and buy things like, as we've said, haircuts and donuts or whatever, and take that burden off of business to the equivalent amount if in fact it is revenue neutral?
Well, according to TD Economics, the savings to business will be passed through to the consumers. That's what's happened in the past in other countries, because we live in a free market economy. I think that some 80% of those savings will be passed on to consumers in the first year. I think 95% of that within 3 years. But it's all about ensuring that we have lower prices so that we can compete both on our export market, but also right here at home. You know, Ontario is the only jurisdiction that exports 80% of what we make, Steve. 80% of what we make goes outside of this province. So we're an export jurisdiction. And we're the only jurisdiction that still taxes the things that businesses buy to make the stuff that they sell around the world. And so by harmonizing our sales tax, going to a national value-added tax based on the GST, administered by the federal government, we get the benefits of only having one tax collector and the tax savings from that and the cost savings to consumers. But beyond that, we end up putting our businesses in a much more competitive position, so that the cost of making an investment in Ontario, whether it's an existing company expanding or whether it's a company coming from outside of Ontario, is being cut in half from some 33% to 16%. That's a prescription for us to be much more competitive.
So it's a pro-business tax?
Oh, well, what it is it's a tax reform on both sides, right? It's income and sales tax, it's people and business. It is a comprehensive tax reform package, but it does change our economy so that we can compete and win. You know, when I talk to people across Ontario, I say, do you think we should be more reliant on the US basket, or do you think we should actually trade with more countries around the world? People tell me, we need to trade more, right? To trade more, then we need to make sure that our businesses are competitive. And we're doing something that I don't think the Americans are going to be able to do. So it's going to give us a structural competitive advantage compared to the people that we're trading with right now.
Here's what Robert Benzie reported last month in the Toronto Star. Ontario's controversial harmonized sales tax is here to stay. no matter who wins the next federal or provincial elections, documents confirm. Buried in the fine print of the accord signed last March between Ottawa and Queen's Park is a clause that ensures the new 13% tax, which takes effect July 1st, 2010, remains at that rate until at least 2012 and stipulates the HST must be in place through 2015. First of all, is that true?
Yes, it is.
Is Ontario locked into the HST for how many years?
Well, we're locked in that the provincial portion of that is 8% for the first 2 years, and that the federal portion is 5% for the first 2 years. Then both governments can change the rate. We're receiving some $4.3 billion from the federal government to support consumers in the first year, because that's going to be a year of transition. We have permanent income tax cuts for people that start in January, and for business that starts in July. It's going to take a while for that to work its way through the system. And we know that the savings to business will be passed through to consumers, and that's not going to happen overnight. So we were able to secure some $4.3 billion from the federal government, which is going right into the wallets of consumers here in Ontario. So obviously the federal government would not transfer $4.3 billion if both sides could just bail out of the agreement overnight, and that's why we've signed that agreement.
But you know how this works. People, for some reason, they say they don't feel the tax savings when they get them, but they sure remember the additional tax expenditures when they have to buy the additional 8% on music lessons, and I keep coming to music lessons, but haircuts and all this stuff that they never used to pay it on before. How do you fight that perception?
Well, I tell people why we're doing it. What is the price if your neighbor is not working? We need to get people back to work. As I said at the beginning, you cannot have high unemployment and have the high quality public services that we have come to expect as our birthright.
But I'm not sure they're connecting the dots between this tax reform package and lower unemployment and better services and all that.
Well, you know, it's interesting. When I go across Ontario, I ask people a simple question. I say, after this recession gets over, and all recessions get over, this may be the worst one since the Second World War, but it will pass. Do you think the economy is going to go back to the way it was, or do you think it's going to be different? I haven't found anyone in Ontario who says somehow it's going to go back to the way it was. So it is going to be different. They understand that for government, it is not appropriate for us to say, well, you know what, the world has changed, but there's nothing we should do about it. Status quo, that's what we should do. Now, my opponents say we should have the status quo, but we disagree, because if the world has changed, it's up to us in government to understand that we have to take advantage of that change and grow a stronger economy.
In fairness to them, and they'll speak for themselves later during our debate, but I don't think any of them are saying status quo is what's on. They say they don't like this. The main thing I hear them saying is we don't like the timing of the implementation of this package. They think in the middle of a, perhaps the worst recession since the Great Depression is not a time when you put additional tax burdens on consumers. I mean, that's a fair point, isn't it?
They make that point, but and I would counter by saying that this is exactly the right time to do it. The signal that we've sent to the business community already is starting to show benefits. Businesses now know that the marginal effective rate is dropping in this province. If they're thinking about expanding, if they're thinking about coming to this province, that's a powerful signal that's sent around the world. You know, a publication just a few months ago said that they thought that Ontario was the very best place for foreign direct investment.
Who said that?
It was, I'll have to get that for you. That was a good question. It starts with
on something.
It starts with the World Global, and but it's economists, and that was before we announced our tax reform package.
So you think it'll be better after that?
Yeah, absolutely,
Okay.
because
we
have to compete for those jobs.
She's telling me we're running out of time, so I got to get to the numbers here. Once again, Robert Benzie in the Toronto Star. Ontario's looming harmonized sales tax should be cut from 13% to 11% to be revenue neutral and discourage scofflaws. That according to new research by leading financial experts. The higher 13% rate could actually bring in less tax revenue than the 11% rate, because of the economic upheaval caused by an unfair tax burden, they claim. If taxes are too high, some people will just bypass them by paying cash. Are these guys right?
Well, there's two things. You have to remember the other side of the equation, which is we're substantially cutting income taxes with that money in the same economy. And the most important thing is it's our ability to go to one harmonized tax base with the GST, which gives us the capacity to provide some $15 billion worth of income tax relief to consumers and to business over the next 3 years. That's major. This is not some tinkering, Steve.
Okay, no, I get
this
that,
is major tax reform.
Will you get better compliance? I mean, you've heard this other criticism that the rate, 13%, is too high, and that people won't comply if they feel it's unfair or too high. If you put it to 11, maybe they'd object to it a little less, and as a result they'd comply a little more, and you'd get more revenue. Is that possible?
Well, what we're looking at is the experience that we see in 130 other countries and our 4 sister provinces who've already done that. And so I know that when we made the difficult decision to move ahead with this, because we felt it was necessary, we looked at all of that and decided that the most important thing to do was to harmonize the tax and substantially cut income tax. I mean, you'll remember when the federal government dropped the GST, what did every economist say? Well, if you've got that kind of money, don't drop the GST, drop income taxes. It would be better for the economy. It would actually make the economy more productive.
One economist
It would lead
disagreed.
to more jobs.
Stephen Harper disagreed. He was the one economist who
Yes, he
disagreed.
did.
Are you telling us tonight that the 13 is set in stone and it will not be lowered, period, full stop?
It will not be lowered for the first 2 years. Period, full stop. That's the agreement we have with the federal government.
After
They're
that,
going
who
to abide
knows?
by then. Well, both governments have the right after that to reset
Okay.
it.
And I know you've said as well, 2 minutes? I know you've said it's revenue neutral. Over what period of time is it revenue neutral? Because if I understand this properly, it's over like a 3 or a 4 year period, after which the tax cutting is done and the enhanced revenues from having this harmonized sales tax applying to everything, really kick in big time, and then it's a major revenue generator for you, isn't it?
The only way that this is going to be a major revenue generator is if the economy starts having robust growth. That's what we don't have right now, and we need to go back to that. Because if we don't get back to that, then it puts at risk all of those public services that we count on in this province. And so it's important for us just to take a difficult step and modernize our tax system, drag it out of the 20th century, and make sure we're competing in the 21st century.
This sounds like a yes, though. It sounds like once the initial, kick-up period is over, this does become a major cash generator for the province, right?
Well, we're just reforming the tax, but remember what economists say is that a broad-based consumption tax is better for the economy than a narrow income tax.
But if this brings in, what is it, $2.5 billion a year, the harmonization of the tax, $2.5 billion per year additional revenue for Ontario, are you cutting income taxes by a concomitant amount?
Oh, by more than that. By more than that's why over the first 3 years it's revenue negative. It's not revenue neutral. It's actually going to cost a bit. But it's important for the long haul that we actually get into the 21st century so that our companies can compete. And if it means that we lower the price of business so that the goods that they sell around the world go down, it also means that the goods that we buy here go down as well.
Okay.
That's the experience around the world, and that's what I predict will happen here in Ontario.
Let me ask you one last thing. I don't have to tell you the history on this. The federal progressive conservatives in 1993 bring in a fancy new tax called the Goods and Services Tax, and we know what happened to them in that election. 2 seats. The Liberals lost the 1999 election in New Brunswick after they harmonized their sales tax. Governments occasionally pay a huge political price for being, quote unquote, brave on tax policy. How worried are you about that?
Governments are elected to lead, Steve. That's our job. We're elected to lead. When the world has changed, we have to do something about it. We're not going to sit back and do nothing, throw up our hands and say, there's nothing we can do. This is the single most important thing that is actually within our ability as a government to ensure that we have a better future for our kids. We do that by having a 21st century economy with a 21st century taxation system generating 21st century jobs. That's what I want for my kids, and I think that's what Ontarians want for their children as well.
And we are grateful for you for coming in tonight to explain your side of this story. We're going to continue the debate on the other side of the studio with some of your friends and some of your not so much friends. So John Wilkinson, Revenue Minister, thanks for coming into TVO tonight.
Great. Thanks, Steve.